Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you for moderating this event, Angel. I also wanted to thank Andre for putting this amazing conference together and his keynote. I will just expand on some of the elements that Andre mentioned earlier, and I do come from the trenches. So although I represent the institute that I founded today, I have been over the last almost 30 years now in the trenches of healthcare, all the way from clinical research, compliance, innovation officer, quality and safety officer, and now over the last few years, I've had the opportunity to work a lot with health tech, biotech, and medtech companies, and have dedicated quite a lot of my passion and energy to entrepreneurship and investments, not only in healthcare, but other industries as well. I will, if you allow me, I'll share my screen real quick. I wanted to share a few slides in addition to some of the comments I'll make. Just 1 second. Please let me know if you're not able to see my screen. Great. Were you able to see my screen? Hello? Are you able to see my screen? It's stating that you need to allow me to share my screen. It's disabled, although I see the button. If you are so kind to disable the screen. If not, I'll just start talking. The keynote will be structured in 2 sections. First, I'll share some of the global landscape that we're all witnessing, and then some of the high impact domains that we have been observing, such as investments in health tech, converging technologies, precision medicine, global health data exchanges, digital health twins, and smart health cities. As Andre already referenced, the global digital healthcare market is poised to reach up to $551 billion by 2027. The global healthcare IT market up to $166 billion by 2028. The global healthcare cloud and computing market is expected to reach $33.4 billion. And I can go on and on about some impressive, not only global US dollars market sizes, but also the growth rates. Some of these markets are poised to grow at even 30%. Additionally, I wanted to share some of the global ecosystem trends that we're witnessing, such as, of course, emerging technologies are currently complementing our existing technologies that we've been deploying in healthcare for more than 10 years. I think we've also noticed a massive increase in advocacy for digital ethics. And I hope that over the next few years, we'll also see a transition not only from increased advocacy, but also towards being able to implement proactive digital ethics programs. Because what we've noticed over the last few years is that if we do not have proactive digital ethics programs, unfortunately, then we suffer the consequences later on by just deploying technologies at a fast pace. As you all know, cybersecurity has been on the agenda of numerous healthcare executives, and it is predicted to be the #1 concern from many surveys that have been published by top consulting firms. So again, digital ethics and cybersecurity should be something proactively thought for and planned for. And then I also strongly recommend that when we do deploy these wonderful proactive programs, you have a plan for sustaining them long term, because that's another element that often comes to my attention, that people spend quite a lot of time, develop a beautiful state-of-the-art program, and then forget to build an ongoing culture of ethics or an ongoing culture of cyber awareness. The other global ecosystem trend that we see is a tremendous effort from international organizations towards finding higher interoperability amongst current digital technologies. We still have a lot of silos, and although each organization or market or country or region is trying to do their best to keep pace with the latest innovations and advancements in science and technology, we have massive challenges to overcome when we think about interoperability amongst all these emerging technologies. That also leads me to the other element that the World Economic Forum recently highlighted, and organizations such as IEEE are also aiming to solve, which is portability. So between interoperability and portability, I think those are probably mentioned most often in teams that are trying to deploy large scale emerging technology programs. Another global trend that I've dedicated quite a lot of time and passion towards is an alignment with sustainable development goals. I think the pandemic has definitely increased awareness about this. In the past, we used to discuss sustainable development goals, and it was always the last one on the agenda at any conference. I've been able to notice that over the last 15 to 18 months, there is definitely more awareness. But like we mentioned with ethics, I think the same applies to the United Nations Sustainable Goals agenda. We have to move from talking about it, educating about it, to actually tracking metrics and impact. So it is essential to develop actionable metrics so that C-suites can have insights that they can rapidly react to, and not just have a beautiful once a year strategic plan where it's being mentioned. Some of the mandates we've seen recently are definitely going to help with that. But I do believe that having a hybrid approach where we're going to have a balance between incentives and mandates is probably a better long-term model. Another element that you might not hear that much about when we talk about healthcare innovation trends is a focus on helping human rights. In addition to the sustainable goals, there are a lot of companies now who have deployed emerging technologies sparked by the pandemic crisis, of course, to try to help facilitate attainment and, of course, maintenance of human rights. And the reason why I mentioned attainment is because in many markets around the world, there are many elements that are extremely concerning. So during the pandemic, we have seen an increase in startups that are dedicating themselves to find creative, emerging technology solutions that can definitely help with some of those elements. As we already alluded to, with opportunity comes also challenge. And I mentioned two before, of course, interoperability, portability. And I think it is essential to also keep in mind that we still have a lot of regulatory and legal challenges, as well as an issue with trust. For those of us that are in the trenches, as Andre mentioned earlier, we're more familiar with emerging technologies, and we are accustomed to the balance that we need to have when we deploy them to maintain privacy and establish trust and all the cyber security defense systems that we need to put in place. But unfortunately, with the rapid pace of new startups that are emerging, sometimes, not that they're not aware, but sometimes it's been placed on the later on stages to be addressed. And I would like to maybe emphasize this during our talk today, that it's essential to think about some of these challenges early on and plan for them, as opposed to just always leave them towards the end, because they're much harder to solve. So again, to summarize, in healthcare currently, globally, some of the top challenges listed are interoperability, portability, trust, cybersecurity, legal, and of course, the one that I referenced before, the ESG consciousness. Luckily, we also have a lot of opportunities, not only challenges. And I know many of our speakers will talk to you about those over the next few days, but I wanted to maybe call your attention to a few of them. Precision medicine, I do believe, is going to be a dominant feature over the next few years. I've had the opportunity to be the president of a genomics company, and I see tremendous uptick in the understanding and deployment of precision medicine solutions. Also, moving from our current healthcare model to a personalized medicine model and shifting from sick care to wellness care is essential. And I do believe it's going to be the future for healthcare and for wellness care. The other two types of medicine specialties that I see emerging and having more and more startups dedicating themselves to, as well as some of the legacy organizations and the new entrants into the market that Andre mentioned, is the augmented medicine and exponential medicine discipline. With the emerging technologies that we're witnessing, we see a blurring of the silos that were traditionally dedicated towards healthcare companies. We now see companies from the financial industry, from technology, from retail, all trying to make their foray into the healthcare market. As we've seen even lately, Walmart, Best Buy, and JP Morgan, I can go on, many other organizations that traditionally were not always associated with healthcare. And I do believe that's going to be a trend that will continue. So again, when I look at opportunities, if I would have to place my shared expertise and insight into what will be the dominant one, I think precision medicine and personalized medicine will probably take up quite a lot of the agenda for C-suites in the next few years. We already mentioned the proactive digital programs before, but I would like to just emphasize one other aspect there. It is essential to align the digital ethics and cybersecurity strategies with the rest of your healthcare enterprise strategy. Having them done at a separate time and completely out of the realm of the rest of the enterprise strategy by experts that do not have the opportunity to collaborate early on will not always yield the best long-term results. So it's really essential, again, to build a digital culture of ethics and a digital culture of cyber awareness. Furthermore, I also wanted to highlight another important aspect, that the big data that we're currently generating over the last 2 decades, 3 decades, I would say, has been massive. And it's really essential to be aware of how we balance those data rights and data stewardship, and how we protect individual rights versus what's good for the society. Now that we had an opportunity to talk about the global landscape, I just wanted to dive into some of the high impact domains I referenced earlier. So for instance, when we talk about investments landscape, already Andre mentioned earlier, I can share that the global venture capital funding just in Q1 and Q2 of 2021 has already reached 15 billion. And the combined corporate funding that includes public funding as well, 19 billion. So this is the highest we've ever had. When we look at the digital health funding, also we have noticed an exponential increase from 2011 until now. We have increased funding massively to the point that in 2020 and 2021, we have reached now 14 billion. Also, in Q2 of 2021, we've had the highest number of unicorns ever created, 136. Just from previous year, to give you the scale, we had only in the 20-30 range, and now we're at 136, which before was almost impossible to even imagine. Also, although everybody was worried that the pandemic will decrease investments, again, we've mentioned it before, but we can see a month-by-month increase in digital health funding. Specifically from April, May 2021, there has been a dramatic, steep increase in digital health funding, which is, of course, very good. When we look at the top funded value propositions, there are a few domains within healthcare that are worth mentioning. And those are research and development, on-demand healthcare, fitness and wellness have been exponentially receiving increased funding as well. Treatment of disease has stayed steady. However, consumer health information has noticed an increase and non-clinical workflows as well. When we think about clinical specialties, it is also important to emphasize that mental health, most likely due to the pandemic crisis, has seen an uptick. Cardiovascular disease has remained fairly steady. It's always enjoyed quite high investments. Diabetes, primary care, substance use disorders, and oncology are also going fairly strong. Furthermore, I wanted to also talk a little bit more about the emerging technologies and the convergence of these emerging technologies. Not only do we see increased adoption of the latest ones such as AI and blockchain and wearables, but we see a combined use. As a matter of fact, most startups that are seeking funding will use 2 or 3 and sometimes even more emerging technologies at the same time. So I think it's important to notice why we mentioned before that interoperability and portability are challenges. It's a real issue that on the one hand is an opportunity for us because you can develop much more advanced solutions when you have these converging technologies, but also all the challenges we referenced before will be amplified. We have seen the combination of course, blockchain and AI very frequently, blockchain IoT. Over the last few weeks, we've also noticed an increase in attention towards AR, VR, XR. Wearables have been already for several years quite often deployed with telehealth and virtual health solutions. And I could go on, but I would like to mention that we see also an increase in 3D and bioimplants. Nanotechnology is experiencing a renaissance, I would say. We had that about 10 years ago, and then we had a lull, but I see tremendous opportunities arise currently. And then, of course, due to several other social media published news, you've learned about brain-computer interfaces. But today I also wanted to highlight that there are numerous universities around the world where state-of-the-art research is being completed on brain-computer interfaces. And almost every month we have promising news about how they can solve severe disease, prevent disease, and address chronic problems that we've been dealing with as a society for a long time, such as patients that had lost their eyesight or patients that lost the ability to walk. So we do have, from an academic and science perspective, quite high hopes that brain-computer interfaces deployed in conjunction with other modern technologies and emerging technologies can help patients long-term. Also, cloud and next-generation computing are one of my favorite topics. I do believe that DNA computing and neuromorphic computing, as well as quantum, will also be mentioned quite often at conferences over the next few years and will make their strong presence in the application of these technologies within healthcare as well. Specifically, life sciences already has several that have been done successfully. And now I also wanted to share a few of the applications. So when we think about technology in healthcare and the latest focus of these innovations, we see that they span across the spectrum, not only in patient care of disease, but also medical imaging has experienced a high uptick, medical diagnostics, medical devices, medical implants, wearables, telehealth, and we already mentioned research and development. When we look at the top areas of clinical integration where technologies can be helpful and have been deployed successfully, we can also share the whole portfolio from care coordination, pharmacy services, laboratory, blood banks, pain management, and over the last few months, we've also seen deployment of emerging technologies in the pain management realm, behavioral services, rehabilitation services, physical therapy, home care, domains that before were never even referenced. As I mentioned earlier, precision medicine will be a dominant feature, and the global precision medicine market is expected to reach 85 billion by 2025, and it's growing at a CAGR of 9.9%. When we look at next generation computing, for instance, and next generation sequencing, they can make tremendous changes in the healthcare ecosystem. On the next generation sequencing, I wanted to highlight the opportunity for whole exome and whole genome to really redefine, transform, recalibrate the way we think about disease, the way we prevent disease, the way we manage wellness, and the way we approach several domains within healthcare. As all of you might be aware, a focus on wellness and longevity is now highly relevant, and a lot of startups are dedicating their resources towards those instead of just treating acute disease or chronic disease. We've also, with the pandemic, noticed an increased emphasis on surveillance of disease, population health, and personalized health solutions. With precision medicine, we can develop not only new vaccines, as we've noticed over the last 2 years, but also other new medications that can address chronic diseases that have plagued our society for 100 years or more. We can also develop new diagnostic methods, such as in pathology, and new treatment pathways. So we're looking forward to see what the future brings in that respect. As I mentioned before, big data has been on all our minds for the last few years, because we need to find a good way to manage out of that large ecosystem of data generated, how we're going to handle the healthcare data and how to maintain privacy. Just to give you a example of the magnitude we're dealing with, 70% of the globe's GDP will have undergone digitization by 2022. And by 2025, it's expected that 463 exabytes of data will be generated daily, and more than 200 plus zettabytes of data will be in cloud storage. So we have a duty to protect that data, of course. The only way I think that can be solved is to have global data exchanges and to move from collaboration towards even further sharing of data that is essential in designing and crafting healthcare solutions that can truly move the needle in global population health. I also think that we'll have to have a global data governance model. It's not easy to achieve. As we mentioned, we have regulatory and legal challenges, but I think that's the only way we can break those silos and truly help populations across the world. I also strongly believe that data, as was recently published in an article, is having the potential of being the sixth power in our society in the digital era. So we need to be very mindful how we handle it. In closing, I wanted to share a few thoughts about digital health twins and digital smart cities. It is an area of passion of mine. I'm actually publishing 2 books on this topic. They're going to come out early 2022. I do believe that digital twins have a great value proposition in quality and safety in healthcare in particular, and they can also expedite the R&D lifecycle, from helping with bioimplants and virtual organs and testing and designing new methods for surgical procedures, designing new drugs. They've been very helpful in silico trials. They can help in medical device development, pharmacy safety, and I could go on and on. Other industries have deployed digital twins already successfully. So I do hope that we will see an increase in that in healthcare and life sciences, as we're already noticing now. From a smart cities perspective, as I mentioned before, we're generating data. So there are experts that believe that at one point we might see a segregation of the Internet of Medicine and Internet of Bodies, because all the wearables and all the implants and other devices we're using are generating healthcare data that at one point will need to be managed very carefully. As we mentioned before, smart precision medicine solutions can also redesign various elements of healthcare, and having smart hospitals, smart pharmacies, smart nursing homes, smart home healthcare will be probably something that our future generations will consider state of the art. I also wanted to mention that there are several organizations and companies and even countries that have deployed smart hospitals, and their smart cities place a huge emphasis on smart healthcare. Last but not least, we see a huge integration between healthcare and financial industry. So the smart cities of the future will have also smart fintech embedded into our ecosystem. Thank you so much. I'm glad that I was able to share some of my thoughts and insights, and I'm looking forward to hearing from all other speakers who will dive into many other interesting areas. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Doctor. That was highly, highly insightful and very interesting. Very interesting to hear about the trends that's happening in healthcare. And as just a consumer of healthcare, I've noticed that there is healthcare on every corner. It seems, and companies like CVS that are now having walk-in therapy for mental health post-pandemic, to your point, the increase in that. Do you find that we're going to be seeing a lot more of that? Healthcare is just so easily accessible for us anywhere, anytime.
I think we do see a trend of extending access to healthcare, yes. And there are all the major tech companies that are showing signs and have already deployed all kinds of, such as the ones that you mentioned. We just a few years ago would have never imagined to have a telehealth session for $5 at Walmart, right? So totally different approach. And as we've seen, CVS and Walgreens are offering a whole set of new services that are in the healthcare domain. So yes, I think this trend will continue.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I was really excited to hear that there's a focus and funding being made for fitness and wellness and preventative type medicine. I think that's something that we definitely need to focus on today. And so what are you seeing as far as the humanity part of healthcare, and how technology will either benefit us or perhaps even take us away from the humanity part? I think this might be maybe a concern or a challenge that we'll face as technology becomes the norm and the smart healthcare starts to take over. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. You're so right, Angel. I'm a big proponent of design thinking in healthcare. Unfortunately, healthcare has been slow to have an interest in design thinking, which is quite ironic given that we deal with humans. But design thinking helps us have a more human-centric approach in not only the way we interact with our patients, but also the way teams interact with each other, because that's another problem. Burnout in healthcare is a big issue. And technology has accentuated that because now we can work faster, but have to interact with more devices. As you know, most providers these days have to interact with more than 10, 20 devices per day. So that is a huge problem. And I do believe that that personalized aspect, not only for the patients and their families, but also amongst clinical teams, is essential. And only by deploying design thinking from the beginning when we deploy emerging technologies can we do a better job at maintaining that humanity aspect that you referenced.
Absolutely. I mean, we've all experienced the burnout technology has, because we became an immediate digital society during the pandemic, and we're all experiencing some level of burnout. So I can only imagine with the increase of technology in healthcare, not to mention all of the changes that the healthcare field endures, not only from a day-to-day perspective, from a minute-to-minute perspective, but how quickly the technology is changing and how adaptable they need to be is pretty impressive. So I guess I'm curious to know, as a leadership trainer and the things that I do in the corporate world, how are we preparing the healthcare workers for the advancement of technology? Are we providing these types of training to help them adapt easier, to prevent the burnout and become more productive in times like these?
I think we can do better. I think you'll hear probably from many experts that are in the trenches, like Andre mentioned, that we're not doing enough. And unfortunately, also the training sometimes is being offered at the wrong timing, meaning you need in vivo training to manage these. A beautiful just video before and being able to train the staff before they actually have to deal with their patients or with their normal routine workflow is not the same. So you can score really well, have most beautiful training, and then still when you deploy the emerging technologies in vivo, you have a drop in productivity and everybody experiences a massive disruption in their workflows because translating an actual face-to-face workflow into a digital workflow and virtual workflow is an art. It's not just digitization or automation. You need to know how to do that, and only by deploying, in my opinion, the design thinking methodology, which takes all the key stakeholders into consideration. And that means all, not just providers, patients, and nurses. It has to be the whole ecosystem that touches that patient.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I could see that. And I would like to hear a little bit more about your book. Are there any more insights you can share with us on the upcoming book?
Sure. Actually, one is already available for purchase that's focusing on applied digital ethics in this digital era. That's covering everything, but one large section, as most of you can predict, is dedicated to healthcare and life sciences. Another one is that's planned for early next year is on digital identity. We've not talked about it, but for healthcare, digital identity is essential. We all leave a digital healthcare footprint quite a lot in this society. And you might not think that that is having an impact on all your other interactions, but it does. So I wanted to emphasize that impact on precision medicine of the future. And then the other one is on digital twins. And last but not least, one that has to do with women leadership, which you might enjoy. So those are the ones. But digital twins, I think, is also one that's very near and dear to my heart. That's why I mentioned it earlier. I'm coming from quality and safety and innovation, and I do believe digital twins are a beautiful trifecta for all those domains in healthcare, safety in particular. So
Fascinating. And where can we find these books of yours? Do you have a website that
um,
we can share?
yes, IGI Global has been my publisher, and it's an academic publisher. I encourage all of you to check out all their beautiful offerings. So thank you for mentioning that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we'd like to thank you for being a part of our virtual summit today and sharing your
Thank you.
expertise with us. And we look forward to seeing your continued success in the future. We wish you well.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank you.
inviting me, and I hope you have a great conference. Thank you.
Appreciate you. Bye-bye.